Willow Creek was a neat little neighborhood where everything had to be perfect. The lawns were always trimmed, the mailboxes all looked the same, and the Homeowners Association (HOA) made sure everyone followed the rules. John Harper moved here 3 years ago with his daughter Lily. He was a quiet man, tall and strong, but he didn't talk much. No one knew he was the county sheriff. He kept that a secret. After his wife died, he wanted a safe, peaceful place for Lily, who was 12 and used a wheelchair because of a condition from when she was little. She couldn't walk, but she had a big smile and loved watching the world around her. They lived in a small house at the end of Elm Street. John built a ramp for Lily so she could get inside easily. Most neighbors liked them, but not Karen Mitchell. Karen ran the HOA like she was the boss of everything. She was loud, nosy, and always picking on people for tiny things, like a flower pot in the wrong spot or a car parked too long. From the day John and Lily arrived, Karen didn't like them. She stared at the ramp with a frown and muttered about ruining the neighborhood. John just wanted to keep things calm for Lily, so he stayed polite, even when Karen glared. The air in Willow Creek felt heavy sometimes. John remembered the first day they moved in, a rainy afternoon, carrying Lily inside while unpacking boxes. He'd hoped this place would be their fresh start. But Karen's sharp voice broke that hope fast, complaining about their moving truck blocking the road. John ignored her then, thinking she'd leave them alone. He was wrong. Karen's eyes were always on them, and trouble was coming. Karen Mitchell didn't waste time making life hard for John Harper and his daughter Lily. It started with the wheelchair ramp John built outside their house. One morning, Karen marched over, her clipboard in hand, and pointed at it. "This is unapproved," she said, her voice loud. "It's ugly and breaks HOA rules." John looked up from tightening a bolt, his hands dirty. "It's for Lily," he said quietly. "She needs it to get inside." Karen scribbled something down and walked off, her lips tight. John hoped that would be the end, but it wasn't. Next, she found more things to complain about. Lily had therapy equipment, braces and a small mat, in the garage. One day the door was open and Karen saw it. She sent a fine in the mail, calling it clutter that ruined the neighborhood's look. Then she started complaining about the faint marks Lily's wheelchair left on the sidewalk. "This is vandalism," she shouted once, waving her arms. Another time, Lily sat on the porch, humming softly to herself. Karen stormed up and said, "That noise is too much. Keep it down." John stayed calm every time. "It's for Lily," he'd say. "Let it go, Karen." He paid the fines or fixed what she demanded, but inside his patience was starting to crack. The neighbors saw it all. Mrs. Carter, an old lady who lived next door, would shake her head. "Poor Lily doesn't deserve this," she'd whisper, peeking through her curtains. She liked the Harpers, but she was scared of Karen's temper. Other kids in Willow Creek used to play with Lily. They'd push her chair or toss her a ball. But when Karen was around, they'd scatter, afraid she'd yell at them too. The street got quieter and the Harpers felt more alone. Lily started noticing. One evening, as John pushed her chair inside, she looked up at him, her eyes big. "Why does she hate us, Dad?" she asked, her voice small. John's heart sank. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair back. "She doesn't hate you, sweetheart," he lied softly. "Some people just don't understand. You're perfect to me." Lily nodded, but her smile wasn't as bright. John hugged her tight, feeling a protective fire grow inside him. He didn't want her to feel this way, but Karen wasn't stopping. Karen's complaints got worse. She'd walk by their house more often, glaring at Lily when she sat outside. Once, John overheard her muttering to another neighbor, "They get special treatment because of that chair. It's not fair." Her voice was sharp, like she hated Lily for being different. John clenched his fists but kept quiet. He didn't want trouble, not yet. He'd dealt with worse as county sheriff, but here he was just a dad trying to keep his little girl safe. Still, every snide comment from Karen pushed him closer to the edge. The neighborhood felt it too. Mrs. Carter left cookies on their porch once, a quiet way of saying she cared, but she wouldn't speak up. The kids stopped coming by altogether. Karen's shadow hung over Elm Street, and her picky rules turned into something meaner. She didn't just want control, she wanted the Harpers gone. John could see it in her eyes, the way she stared at Lily like she was a problem to fix. Trouble was building, and he knew it wouldn't stay small much longer. It was a hot summer day in Willow Creek, and the community pool was busy with kids splashing and laughing. Lily loved being there even though she couldn't swim. Her condition made her legs too weak, and her lungs couldn't handle the water. She sat in her wheelchair near the edge, watching with a big smile. John, her dad, sat close by on a bench, sipping a cold drink. He kept an eye on her like always. The sun was bright and everything felt calm, until Karen Mitchell showed up. Karen marched in, her face red and angry. She spotted Lily's wheelchair and stormed over. "This isn't a handicap zone," she yelled, pointing at the chair. It wasn't even blocking anything, there was plenty of room. John stood up, his voice firm but quiet. "She's not in the way, Karen. Back off." But Karen didn't listen. She never did. Her eyes narrowed and she stepped closer, her hands shaking with rage. Before John could stop her, Karen grabbed the handles of Lily's wheelchair. "Maybe this'll teach you," she shouted. With one hard push, she shoved the chair toward the pool. It tipped over the edge and Lily fell in with a scream. The wheelchair sank fast, and Lily splashed in the deep end, her arms flailing. She couldn't swim, her body wouldn't let her. The crowd went silent, then gasped. John didn't think. He dropped his drink and dove into the pool, cutting through the water. He reached Lily in seconds, wrapping his arms around her as she coughed and cried. Her little body shook, water dripping from her hair. He pulled her to the shallow end and climbed out, holding her tight against his chest. His shirt was soaked and his heart pounded with fury, but he kept it inside, for now. Karen stood there, arms crossed, smirking. "She's fine," she said, rolling her eyes. "Stop overreacting." Neighbors stared, some pulling out their phones to record. A few kids whispered, and Mrs. Carter covered her mouth in shock. John set Lily down gently on the ground, making sure she could breathe. Then he stood up, water dripping from him, and turned to Karen. He yanked off his wet jacket, and there it was, his county sheriff badge shining in the sun. "You assaulted my daughter," he said, his voice low and hard. "I'm the county sheriff." Karen's smirk disappeared. Her face went white and her mouth opened, but no words came out. The crowd murmured louder, phone still recording. John didn't yell, he didn't need to. His badge said everything. Karen took a step back, her hands trembling now for a different reason. She'd gone too far and she knew it. Trouble had found her, and there was no escaping it this time. Lily was shaking, her small body cold and wet from the pool. She clung to John, her arms tight around his neck, her breaths quick and scared. Water dripped from her hair onto his soaked shirt. He grabbed a towel from a nearby chair and wrapped it around her, pulling her close. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice soft but steady. She buried her face in his chest, still coughing a little, her wheelchair lost at the bottom of the pool. John rubbed her back, his heart aching as he felt her tremble. Karen stood a few feet away, her face pale. The smirk was gone now. "I didn't mean it," she stammered, her voice shaky. "It was an accident, she's fine." But the neighbors didn't buy it. People in the crowd muttered angrily, some still holding up their phones, recording everything. A man shouted, "You pushed her in." Karen's eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but the crowd's anger was growing. John ignored her excuses. He pulled out his phone with one hand, still holding Lily, and called his deputies. "I need backup at the Willow Creek pool," he said, his tone sharp. "Now." He set Lily down gently on the bench, keeping the towel around her. Then he stepped toward Karen, his sheriff badge still shining on his belt. He pulled handcuffs from his pocket and grabbed her wrists. "You're under arrest for assault," he said, his voice cold and clear. He read her rights. "You have the right to remain silent," each word like ice. Karen squirmed, whining, "This is ridiculous," but John didn't flinch. He clicked the cuffs tight and soon 2 deputies arrived. They took her to their car as neighbors clapped quietly, some nodding at John with respect. John turned back to Lily, scooping her up in his arms. She was lighter than ever, her wet clothes sticking to her. He carried her away from the pool, his boots squishing with every step. In his head he made a promise. This nightmare with Karen was over, he'd make sure of it. The crowd parted as he walked, their eyes soft with worry for Lily. When he got home he set her on the couch, wrapping her in a dry blanket. Her shivering slowed, but her eyes were still wide. A knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Carter, the old lady next door, holding a tray with 2 mugs of tea. Her hands shook a little and her eyes were wet with tears. "I saw it all," she said, her voice cracking. "You're a good man, John. And Lily, she's a brave girl." She set the tea down and patted Lily's hand. John nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you," he managed. Mrs. Carter smiled, proud of him, then left them alone. John sat beside Lily, sipping the tea, feeling the weight of the day. Justice had started, but he wouldn't rest until it was finished. A week after the pool incident, the HOA called an emergency meeting in the Willow Creek clubhouse. Everyone was there, neighbors packed the room, whispering about what happened. Karen Mitchell was out on bail, sitting in the front row, her arms crossed. She looked smug, like she'd won already. "It was a misunderstanding," she said loudly when the meeting started. "People are making it bigger than it is." But her voice sounded weaker than usual. John Harper wasn't buying it, and neither were the others. John walked in not as the quiet dad from Elm Street, but as the county sheriff. He wore his full uniform, dark shirt, badge shining on his chest, hat tucked under his arm. People stared as he took a spot at the front. He wasn't hiding anymore. He carried a folder thick with papers and a USB drive. The HOA board, 3 nervous-looking people, sat at a table, avoiding his eyes. John stepped up and started talking, his voice strong and clear. "I've got proof," he said. He plugged the USB into a laptop and played videos from the pool. Phones had caught everything. The room went quiet as they watched Karen push Lily's wheelchair into the water, her angry shout echoing, "Maybe this'll teach you." Gasps filled the air. Then John pulled out papers, old fines and complaints Karen had written about Lily's ramp, her therapy stuff, even her humming. "She's been targeting my daughter for months," he said, holding up a stack. "This wasn't an accident." He handed over statements too. Mrs. Carter wrote how Karen scared everyone, and other neighbors added their stories. People started speaking up. Mrs. Carter stood, her voice shaky but loud. "She fined me for my flowers last year." A man in the back said, "She yelled at my kids for riding bikes." More voices joined in, telling how Karen had bullied them for years. The room buzzed with anger. The HOA board shifted in their seats, looking sweaty and trapped. They'd let Karen run things too long, and now it was falling apart. John faced them, his badge catching the light. "Karen needs to go," he said. "She's not fit for the HOA. She hurt my daughter and she's hurt this neighborhood." The crowd clapped, some cheering, "Get her out." Karen's face turned red, then white. She tried to argue, "This is unfair." But no one listened. The board whispered to each other, then the head guy nodded. "We vote her off," he said, his voice small. "She's done." Karen slumped in her chair, humiliated, her power gone. John didn't smile. He just nodded and packed up his folder. The room felt lighter, like a storm had passed. Karen's reign was over, and Willow Creek was ready to change. After the HOA meeting, Karen Mitchell's troubles got bigger. The law caught up with her fast. She was charged with serious crimes, felony assault on a minor and reckless endangerment, for pushing Lily into the pool. John Harper, as county sheriff, made sure the case was solid. But he wasn't just the sheriff here, he was Lily's dad too. A few weeks later, the trial started in the county courthouse. Karen sat there looking smaller than ever, her smug face gone. John took the stand wearing his uniform, his badge shining. He told the judge everything, how Karen had targeted Lily for months, how she'd shoved her wheelchair into the water, how Lily couldn't swim. His voice stayed steady, but it shook a little when he said, "She's my daughter. I pulled her out, scared and coughing." The courtroom was quiet, everyone listening. The evidence was clear. The videos from the pool played again, showing Karen's angry push. Neighbors like Mrs. Carter spoke too, saying how Karen had been cruel for years. The jury didn't take long to decide. The judge looked at Karen and said, "Guilty." She was sentenced to 3 years in jail, no chance to wiggle out. On top of that, she had to pay big fines, thousands of dollars. Some of it went to cover Lily's doctor visits after the incident, because she'd needed checkups and extra therapy to feel safe again. The rest was punishment for what she'd done. Karen's head dropped as they led her away, her hands cuffed again. John didn't stay to watch her leave the courtroom. He had work to do. As sheriff, he went to the station later that day to oversee her booking. He stood there, arms crossed, while deputies took her fingerprints and picture. Karen didn't look at him, she kept her eyes on the floor, muttering under her breath. John made sure everything was done right, no mistakes, no favors. It was his job and he took it seriously. But he didn't feel happy about it. Seeing her locked up didn't bring him joy, just a deep, quiet relief. Lily wouldn't have to fear her anymore. That was enough. Back home, he sat with Lily on the couch. She was doing better, her smile coming back little by little. The fines helped pay for a new wheelchair since the old one was ruined in the pool. John watched her draw pictures, her small hands steady now. He thought about the trial, the jail cell, the money Karen had to pay. It wasn't about winning, it was about keeping his little girl safe. The law had done its part and he'd done his. Willow Creek was finally free of Karen, and John could breathe easier knowing Lily's world was a little brighter. Weeks passed since Karen went to jail, and Willow Creek started to feel different. Lily stayed with John, her dad, in their little house on Elm Street. The pool incident had scared her, but she was getting stronger every day. John got her a new wheelchair, shiny and smooth since the old one was ruined. He also bought her a soft, warm blanket, bright purple, her favorite color. She'd wrap it around herself and smile again the way she used to. One sunny afternoon, John pushed her around the yard, her laughter filling the air. The trauma was still there, but it was fading, and John could see her light coming back. The neighborhood changed too. With Karen gone, the HOA stopped being so strict. No more silly fines or angry notes. People relaxed, and they started coming by to see Lily and John. Mrs. Carter, the sweet old lady next door, brought a plate of warm cookies one day. "For my brave girl," she said, patting Lily's hand. Lily grinned and shared one with John. The kids who used to play with her came back too. They knocked on the door with a new ball, asking, "Can Lily come out?" John pushed her outside, and they tossed the ball gently, laughing as she caught it. The street felt alive again, like Karen's shadow had finally lifted. One quiet evening, Lily sat with John on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange. She looked up at him, her eyes big and bright. "You're my hero, Dad," she said softly. John's heart swelled. He pulled her close, hugging her tight, the blanket soft between them. "You're mine too," he whispered. For the first time in a long while, he felt peace. No more fights, no more fear, just him and Lily safe together. He knew they'd be okay now. The ramp outside their house stayed. One day the neighborhood kids grabbed some paint, red, blue, yellow, and turned it into a bright, messy masterpiece. Lily watched from her chair, clapping as they worked. "It's pretty," she said, and John nodded. It wasn't just a ramp anymore, it was a sign things were better. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was lighter now. People waved when they passed by, and the air didn't feel heavy anymore. Karen's mean rules were gone, and the neighborhood could breathe. John and Lily kept their quiet life, rebuilding it step by step. He'd push her to the park, or they'd sit outside with lemonade, watching the world go by. The cookies, the ball, the painted ramp, they were little things, but they meant everything. Lily's smile was back, and John's heart was full. They'd made it through together, and that was all that mattered.